Greenwitch by Susan Cooper, Chapter 3. Under the sunset sky, the sea was glass smooth, long, slow rollers from the Atlantic, rippling like muscles beneath the skin, made the only sign of the great invisible strength of the ocean in all the tranquil evening. Quietly, the fishing boats moved out, a broad fishtail wake spreading behind each one. Their engines chugged softly through the still air. Jane stood at the end of Kamar Head, on the crest of a granite outfall that tumbled its rocks 200 feet to the sea, and she watched them go. Toy boats, they seemed from there, the scatter of a fishing fleet that every week, every month, every year, for endless years had been going out after the pilchard or the mackerel before dusk, and staying at the chase until dawn. Every year there were fewer of them, but still every year they went. The sun dropped on the horizon, a fat glowing ball spreading yellow light over all the smooth sea. The last boat crept out of Truessic Harbor, its engines thumping like a muffled heartbeat in Jane's ears. As the last spreading lines of the boat's wake washed against the harbor wall, in a final swift rush, the great sun dropped below the horizon, and the light of the April evening began very slowly to die. A small wind sprang up. Jane shivered and pulled her jacket around her. There was suddenly a coldness in the darkening air. As if in answer to the beginning breeze, a light started up across Truessic Bay, on the headland opposite Kamar Head. At the same time there was a sudden warmth behind Jane's back. She swung around and saw dark figures against tall flames, where a light had been set to the towering pile of driftwood and branches that had lain waiting to become a bonfire for this one night. Mrs. Penhallow had told her that the two beacons would burn until the fishing boats came back, flames leaping all through the night until dawn. Mrs. Penhallow. Now there was a mystery. Jane thought again of the moment that afternoon when she had been alone in the living room, flipping through a magazine, waiting for Simon. She had heard a nervous clearing of the throat, and there in the kitchen doorway Mrs. Penhallow was standing, round and rosy, and unusually fidgety. "If you fancy coming to the making tonight, my dear, you're welcome," she said abruptly. Jane blinked at her. "The making? The making of the Greenwitch?" The lilt of Mrs. Penhallow's Cornish accent seemed more marked than usual. "It do take all the night. 'Tis a long business, and no outsiders allowed near generally. But if you feel you'd like, you being the only female close to the professor and all," she waved a hand as if to catch words, "the women did agree it's all right, and I'd be happy to take ye." "Thank you very much," said Jane, puzzled but pleased. Could Mrs. Stanton come too?" "No," Mrs. Penhallow said sharply. She added more gently as Jane's eyebrows went up, "She am a furriner, you see. 'Tisn't fitting." Up on the headland, gazing at the fire, Jane remembered the flat finality of the words. She had accepted the pronouncement and, without even trying to explain the situation to Fran Stanton, had come out after supper to the headland with Mrs. Penhallow. Yet still she had been given no idea of what was to happen. Nobody had told her what the thing called the Greenwitch would be like, or how it would be made, or what would happen to it. She knew only that the business would occupy the whole night and end when the fishermen came home. Jane shivered again. Night was falling, and she was not over fond of the nights of Cornwall. They held too much of the unknown. Black shadows ran over the rocks around her, dancing and disappearing as the flames leapt. Instinctively, seeking company, Jane moved forward into the circle of bright light around the bonfire. Yet this too was unnerving, for now the other figures moved to and fro at the edge of the darkness, out of sight, and she felt suddenly vulnerable. She hesitated, frightened by the tension in the air. "Come, my dear," said Mrs. Penhallow's soft voice beside her. "Come by here." There was a hint of urgency in her tone. Hastily she shook Jane by the arm and led her aside. "Time for the making," she said. "You want to keep out of the way if you can." Then she was gone again, leaving Jane alone near a group of women, busying themselves with something not yet visible. Jane found a rock and sat down, warmed by the fire. She watched. Scores of women were there, of all ages, the younger ones in jeans and sweaters, the rest in sturdy dark skirts. long as overcoats, and high, heavy boots. Jane could see a big pile of stones, each the size of a man's head, and a far higher pile of green branches, hawthorn, she thought, too leafy to be intended for the fire. But she did not understand the purpose of either of these. Then one tall woman moved out before the rest and held one arm high in the air. She called out something Jane could not understand. And at once the women set to working in a curiously ordered way in small groups. Some would take up a branch, strip it of leaves and twigs, and test it for flexibility. Others then would take the branch and in some swift practice way weave it together with others into what began very slowly to emerge as a kind of frame. After a while, the frame began to show signs of becoming a great cylinder. The cleaning and bending and tying went on for a long time. Jane shifted restlessly. The leaves on some of the branches seemed to be of a different shape from the hawthorn. She was not close enough to see what they might be, and she did not intend to move. She felt she would only be safe here, half invisible on her rock, unnoticed, watching from a little way off. At the far side, suddenly she found a tall woman who seemed to be the other's leader. Bright eyes looked down at her out of a thin face, framed by a scarf tied around her chin. "Jane Drew, is it?" the woman said with a Cornish accent that sounded oddly hard. "One of those who found the Grail?" Jane jumped. The thought of the Grail was never fully out of her mind, but she had not linked it with this strange ceremony here. The woman, however, did not mention it again. "Watch for the Greenwitch," she said conversationally. It was like a greeting. The sky was almost black now, with only a faint rim of the glow of daylight. The lights of the 2 bonfires burned brightly at the headlands. Jane said hastily, clutching at this companionship against the lonely dark, "What are they doing with those branches?" "Hazel for the framework," the woman said. "Rowan for the head. Then the body is of hawthorn boughs and hawthorn blossoms, with the stones within for the sinking. And those who are crossed or barren, or who would make any wish, must touch the Greenwitch before she be put off the cliff." "Oh," Jane said. "Watch for the Greenwitch," said the woman pleasantly again, and moved away. Over her shoulder she said, "You may make a wish too if you like. I will call you at the right time." Jane was left wondering and nervous. The women were busier now, working steadily, singing in a strange kind of wordless humming. The cylinder shape grew more distinct, closer woven, and they carried the stones and put them inside. The head began to take shape, a huge head, long, squarish, without features. When the framework was done, they began weaving into it green branches, starred with white blossoms. Jane could smell the heavy sweetness of the hawthorn. Somehow it reminded her of the sea. And we'll pause there.